We don't want to hear the buzzing. I'll just shout. I'm Sally Bagshaw, and I work with Tim. I'm on City Council. And like Jessica and Maxine, it was really Sandy Hook that kicked me in the high end saying, we got to do more. Cafe Racer broke my heart. What we have seen with Gabby Giffords 2 years ago, the congresswoman who was shot 4 feet from her face with a Glock by somebody who was just taking it out on her. That really touched me deeply because Sally Clark and I frequently go out and do something called Coffee with Sally's. And so we have little meetings where people can come in and talk with us, and that's what Gabby Giffords was doing that day. She had something called Congress on Your Corner, and just opened up her heart to talk with people. And there was somebody who really didn't feel that she was doing the right thing and decided that he and his Glock were going to take her out. The fact that she still survived after having a bullet from 4 feet away is just a miracle in itself. But I will tell you, it took Sandy Hook for me to realize that the worst thing that I could possibly imagine was to get that phone call. As a parent of a first grader to call, or a grandparent, I'm a new grandmother, to hear that your baby was shot in a public school, it totally made me so sick that I really felt like now is the time we've got to come together. And it so happened that on Sunday night after Sandy Hook, I was at a Christmas party with some good friends, Steve Boyd, many of you know him. And Steve approached me and literally grabbed me by the scarf I had on at the time. And he said, you, and he meant me, City Council, and Tim Burgess and others, need to step forward on this. And that it's a public safety issue, and our Assistant Chief Metz is here, it is a public health issue, and that meant reaching out to the University of Washington, to Howie Frumpkin, and to our own David Fleming, the Seattle King County Public Health Department. And it takes moral leadership, and that's where all of you come in. Now, some of the clergy stepped forward immediately. Our Reverend Sandy Brown, who is here, Rabbi Daniel Wiener, another 30 of them got together immediately and said, we're going to reach out statewide. And that's what we have been doing, is we reached out statewide to begin to bring the networks together. And what we're doing is networks of networks. So we have our public safety, and I know that Chief Metz is going to talk more about that in a few minutes. We've got our public health team reaching out. And 3 weeks ago, we had an event at Town Hall, and many of you were there. I recognize your faces. And what was marvelous about that, we were in the lower floor of Town Hall, but it was completely jam-packed. The whole hall was full, the annex was full, and there were almost 60 people that were turned away at the door. So what we know is that people are coming together and really want to address this differently. So immediately after we started talking, a group of us came together, and it included Eric Liu from the leadership team that many of you know Eric, and Nick Hanauer, many of you know him as a local philanthropist who's been wonderful. And we immediately reached out to the legislature. Jamie Peterson from the 43rd District, Ed Murray also from the 43rd, Frank Chop also from the 43rd, helped us get involved with others. And so we brought this team together. We now have an organization, and when somebody was saying, what do we do next? Here's what you do next. We have a legitimate 501c4 organization that we have just filed, and it is called the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility. The website is still, in the just formation phases, but I would say within the next couple of weeks that you will be able to go on and see the links. And what that will link to is the Brady campaign and the Gabby Giffords group that they're reaching out. So we're going to have the national connections as well as the statewide connections. Because frankly, what we know about the legislature is that Seattle isn't necessarily the legislator's best friend. And in fact, it's almost a rural-urban, I don't want to call it a joke because it's not funny, but if something doesn't work in the legislature, it's Seattle's fault. It's because we're too liberal. It's because we're too progressive. It's because we want something that the rest of the state doesn't. But we have been working on something called Seattle for Washington. And this started a number of years ago, and I want to credit my colleague, Richard Conlon, for getting this started. So since I've been on council, and this is my 4th year of my first term, we've been reaching out statewide to other legislators to find out what is it in the east side of the mountains that we can do together. So we know that legislators in Wenatchee are representing farmers that are growing apples and peaches, and they need to get that to our port. So we know from a standpoint of transportation that I-90 has to move well. We know that in our city, a lot of the money, the tax money that we bring in from gas taxes, that goes east of the mountains. So there really needs to be this understanding that we're all in this together. So that's been my goal. So what we know now is that the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility is something that will help connect all of us. And as Tim Burgess was saying, we have some things in front of the legislature right now. The one that is most likely to move forward is House Bill 1588. And it would require background checks for everybody who is selling a gun. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to a gun show, but let me describe my experience at a gun show. And I did this a number of years ago. I had a flight instructor who said, I'm going to sell some guns, I'm going to go to the gun show, you want to come? And I was like, this is a slice of Americana I have never seen. I came out of the prosecuting attorney's office. I worked with Norm Malin for years as chief of his civil division. I had never been to a gun show. So I say, yes, we're going to go. We go to Puyallup, the same places where the 4-H kids were, 2 weeks prior, is now cheek to jowl with card tables that are set up. Every gun that you could possibly imagine is for sale. And on the table, on each table, is a little sign that says, no ID, no sales tax. So I could walk up to Mary's table and whatever she was offering to sell, whether it was a Glock, whether it was an assault weapon, whether it was a pistol, a rifle, I could buy it from her. She doesn't ask me for a thing, not my name. I don't pay sales tax, but I can buy a gun from her on a cash transaction. That's what we're trying to stop. In our state right now, if you go to a licensed dealer, there's a background check, and it's a 5-day background check. They check your criminal history, they check to see if you have a mental situation that is on file, and if it's a criminal problem, you can't buy the gun. But the rest of us could buy a gun and within 5 days have something. Also, as Tim was saying, we have no limit on the magazine size. One of the horrific things that happened with Gabrielle Gifford's incident was that the magazine that was included in that gun that he shot, and it was over 30. There was over 30 bullets that he was able to fire off. 18 people were killed and wounded in that incident. So it's not to say that having a magazine in 10 would be, ultimate, but it's certainly better than having an over 30 magazine. So the kinds of things that Tim was talking about, the background checks, the ban on assault weapons, the reduction in the size of magazines, these are things that we want to accomplish. But I will tell you right now, we're in it for the long haul. If we get anything past the legislature this time, it will be this background check. And when I say if, the House has enough Democratic members that are also urban members that are willing to, from a majority standpoint, say, we will help you get this passed. We don't even know that we can get it to the floor of the Senate for a vote, which in my mind is really shameful, but that's what we're dealing with. So the good news is, from the glass half full standpoint, is that at least we've got a bill this year that is on the floor of the House that will be voted on. And if we are joining together, so it's law enforcement, it's public health, it's Moms Rising, it's your mom's group. It's all of us here who are the moral leadership of the state. If we're able to stand up and tell our legislators that we really want to change the culture. And the culture we want to change is this one that it's not that we're taking on the Second Amendment. Believe me, we know that that is not something any of us are trying to do. If somebody wants to have a handgun for their own protection inside the house, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that's their right. But the Supreme Court has also said to us is that we have a right to put reasonable restrictions on how people and where people use these guns. So that's what we're after. And I keep reminding people, no, I'm not trying to trample on anybody's Second Amendment rights. That's not it. But just like Tim was saying, if you drive a car, it's not a right to drive a car. It's a privilege to drive a car. And you get licensed and you get trained, and the car has certain requirements on it, has certain safety requirements that we expect as a state and as a nation. And that's the same thing we should be asking and requiring for those who have and use and sell and trade guns. So, from the good news standpoint is that we've got the organizations going, the network of networks. And it's, as I mentioned it before, Washington Alliance for Gun Regulations. And for gun responsibility, thank you. Much better. Responsibility is the name. So the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility is just getting started, but it is funded. I mean, thanks so much to the CAMAR and many others. There is money to get this going. And it is an unusual situation where a lot of people come together and say, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it this year, but know that we're in it for the long haul. It's what we can do this year, maybe small, but then what we do next year, maybe bigger. Some folks are saying, well, what do you think about an initiative? Everybody is open to this possibility, but we also want to have an initiative that will pass and not lose. Many of you remember that about a decade and a half, something very small was put in front of the vote of the people, which makes sense to me, and that is if you have a gun in your house, the initiative would have required you to make sure that it was locked up. Seems like it's a pretty simple thing, but it went down 60-40. So this time we need all of us to come together and figure out what the steps are going to be. And we're going to take those steps together, and we're going to make sure that as a nation that we change this culture and that we're all safer, and that's what it's all about. It's safe for you and safe for all of our kids. So I want to say thank you. You could be so many places today, but you're here. Thank you for being here.